Um, Today's class, Civil 3D, Trimble for construction staking. This is all about taking engineers' data, design data, prepping it, exporting it out for construction staking. So I'm Brian, I'm with CTC. This is Jay, he's with Frontier Precision. That's about it, yeah. So we want to just give you a little summary, a little more of an overview of what this is focused on. It is about data prep, and we are focusing on Trimble data collectors. We had to pick one. So we're working with Trimble data collectors because they're the best, right? And it's working within Civil 3D. So we're going to be going between these two computers, pulling data out of Civil 3D, putting it into a Trimble data collector, into Trimble Access, and seeing how that works, how you work with that. Just a couple items we want to kind of bring up and address. Some of the challenges around it. These are not streamlined workflows. There's no easy button on this stuff, right? A lot of challenges involved with it. Some of these we can't even address here. We don't have CAD files. Okay, we have to recreate that stuff. We have to come right into Civil 3D or TBC and recreate digital data to stake. That's a tough place to be in. Sometimes we only have 2D CAD files with no elevation information. That's another real challenge here. What we want to show you guys is when you have model data, or at least some kind of 3D data, how to take that, what's the most efficient way to get that ready for staking. And so surveyors or people who are prepping for the surveyors aren't recreating the wheel. So we're hoping to show you some workflows on that. So recreating that engineer's data is a big challenge. If the field guys are the ones doing the data prep, oftentimes they're not your top Civil 3D users, right? So it's tough to go in there and open a drawing with a big corridor in it and know how to take that thing and go stake that. If I didn't know Civil 3D and I went in there and picked on this huge road model, I'd be afraid to touch that thing. I'd go grab a plan set and start comping some points for myself. That's a big challenge. And then exporting it. How do you get the data out of there? You know, there's all these proprietary Autodesk formats and proprietary Trimble formats. How do we deal with that? So, do you have any to add to that, Jay? Any challenges?
No, I don't think so. I think just from our side of things, the biggest, this is probably one of the biggest hurdles that we see is this office to field disconnect. And I guess one of the unfortunate things that I see a lot is, you know, a lot of companies that we deal with have Civil 3D and have these full designs. But I see survey managers with the data collector at their desk still hand keying roads in because that's what they feel comfortable doing, and that's not a good use of anybody's time when all the data is there. So we want to show you maybe how to use that transition a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So some general best practices that we're taking advantage of here is to try to work right with engineers' data, design data. And that doesn't mean you just grab a drawing and say export, right? There's some data prep involved there, but we're trying to avoid recreating data. We want to use tools that make that possible, so we're going to use Trimble Link. It's a free add-on. How many people use Trimble Link? Heard of it? Okay. Is everyone in here a fairly experienced Civil 3D user? Okay. How many of us are field people who really don't touch Civil 3D much? Okay. A couple of you guys. Okay. So Trimble Link is a great tool, and we want to use more flexible data. What I call flexible data is things like alignments and roads as opposed to a point file where you're kind of stuck staking at one point. I mean, you can in the collector go say stake from this point to that point and then stake along that line, for example. But what if we just had the entire alignment for an entire string for a whole ditch or a curb line or something like that? That's the idea here. So we want to show you some workflows around that. And only export relevant data. You know, we're pushing this stuff from powerful workstations in Civil 3D to a small data collector. So don't just send everything out. Try to trim it down to what you're working with. So what we're going to do here, we're going to jump into the software in a second. We kind of broke it up into two different project types, more site-oriented and more transportation projects. And so the tool sets that we're going to be showing in each are what are more relevant in those two project types. So for site projects, we're going to start in Civil 3D and we're going to talk about exporting curb lines for staking, surfaces, and then pipe networks. That can be a little tricky depending on what kind of data you're looking to get. And then we're going to jump into Trimble Access. We're going to import that data And he's got it loaded up on the screen here when we switch to his. We're going to go right into those stakeout routines so you see how some of that stuff comes up there. Similar thing, but we're with the transportation projects, but we're going to take corridors and export those as roads and show how those comes in there, how those come in. There's been some good improvements on the Trimble end recently on that stuff to take those road models. So, how many people in the room routinely are prepping data to be staked in the field, whether you're staking it or someone else is doing it, okay? And how many people are doing more than just providing points, okay? Still most of us, okay? How many guys are routinely and successfully pushing corridor models out there and RXLs and awesome. You guys want to come up here and teach it? Just kidding. I'm going to jump into Civil 3D and show a few routines on this here and a number of different options. We don't exactly have just one workflow to show you here, but rather a few different options. Some of the simplest stuff is to simply take a DWG and export to a DXF. I know a lot of people prefer that because it's really simple. You pretty much hit Export DXF button. There's some drawbacks to it. You get one file type, it just kind of all dumps into the data collector. And what exports is a little limiting. So one of the things you want to do is to try to turn things off. So it's like freezing things like this that aren't relevant to the data collector. But even so, and I'm going to do this here, I'm going to export to DXF. When you do this, there's other catches. You can't just freeze a few things. For example, XREFs. Doesn't want to routinely out of the box push out a DWG with an XREF loader. You have to detach an XREF, okay? So for those of you who haven't done this much, let me just push this out. DXF. I'll export this. I'll overwrite that one. And I'm just going to open it up again in here and you'll see kind of what shows up. So what we have there on the screen is one thing. I froze some things. If I go and open up that same DXF, there's the profile view. I turned it off, it's still there. Some other feature lines are showing up that I had, or that were frozen. It's a little clumsy to work with. So we're not a big fan of it. It's a fairly simple way the surveyor can be in the field and just simply pick lines and stake those. Jay's going to show you a few other issues on the data collector side with this, what makes that challenging. Next thing, we're dealing with feature lines and curb gradings in Civil 3D. They might be grading these in different ways. In this case, I have some grading objects. We might have been using some stepped offset feature lines, for example. A lot of times what we're wanting to stake is back a curb. Any of you guys who are using grading objects, you get this little loop-de-loo thing here, right? And you want to stake this right here. So what's the simplest way? The simplest way I've found is we have to take my actual core feature line and I've got to give it some kind of stepped offset. I have to define the geometry along back a curb. And you got to be careful about this. If I just run a stepped offset on this, that's going to throw it in the same site and everything's going to start interacting. It's going to kind of make a mess of things. So what I say is grab some of these key feature lines, do a copy to site, make new sites for this stuff. Of course, we'd probably have a whole separate drawing to begin with, not taking the exact drawing the engineer or the designer was working on. And then you end up with this separate feature line that's in a different site. This will now not interact with this grading objects. So what I do here is then run a stepped offset. Offset to this side. Go up a half a foot, okay. That's assuming everything's concentric, right? So I now have this data. Feature lines don't push out that well. We want to get an alignment and profile. We want to be able to stake this thing. One of these tools CTC wrote, feature line to alignment. This is one of the things this is geared towards, is to be able to take a feature line like this, pick on it, and it'll run a conversion tool, much like the polyline to alignment tool. This will take a feature line and generate alignment and a profile. And the key is that it's a layout profile, so this is maybe my north back curve. I turn on create profile. I'll even say draw on profile view, just so we can see the data. Turn on my layers. And there's that profile. No, that's not it yet. One more layer. Take a look at it in Prospector here. That north back curve, we have the profile. Let me spit one more out there. You guys are supposed to catch these clicks I missed. North back curve. Profile. There it is. It spits out a layout profile. This is what you need to create an RXL that Trimble Link spits out. The point of this tool is just easy exporting of feature lines converting. So I've got alignment along there, I've got the profile. I can now go to Trimble Link, run export alignment, grab that North BC, tell it to bring the profile with it, and I get that exact back of curve alignment. So those of you who haven't used Trimble Link, basically able to browse to a collector, to anywhere on your desktop. You set up different locations to browse to, and I can spit this out as an RXL file. Okay, so that's, to me, that's one of the that's a nice workflow for staking curb lines when it's made from feature line data. Surfaces. Want to be doing spot checks in the field? Trimble Link makes this really easy. Got a single surface, export surface. So there's that great export surface button. Utilities, staking storm, sanitary. A couple options. One's pretty straightforward. You want to stake center of structures, and you want to get stake to center of the invert of the structure. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. There's a number of ways we can do this. We can be generating points. We can also use this structures in CSV tool on the toolbox. And when I run that, it gives me a CSV. You got to do a little bit of formatting, but you can make a PNEZD file out of it and work with that. That's one of the simplest ways. So you get all this kind of junk in here, but you get rim and sump elevation or invert, and you can work with that data. You can spit that out. I see a lot of people asking for, well, I have to, along long pipe runs, I have to stake along the invert of that. I got to give them stakes every 25 or 50 feet, whatever it is. It's not just structures. I've seen people, they want to work with something more than just those points. They don't have to be able to pick this point and that point and say stake between that point. For one, that's a lot of tedious work in the field, and two, the inverts for a structure don't necessarily match the inverts for a pipe. So if you go from that invert to that invert, that doesn't necessarily represent the invert of the pipe. What you have to do, you got to make, if you want to be able to stake along this as though it's an alignment and profile, you have to generate the alignment and profile. So we have the alignment here. I believe I have it in here. If I don't, I'll create it quick. Okay. We have an alignment. Pretty straightforward. We need a profile representing invert. There's no way to automate this. The ways I've found to do it depends on where you want to draw your profile. For starters, turn your masking off on your structure style. And what this will do in profile view, if we turn off enable masking, it'll now show these pipe ends. The other thing, and this gets into how you quantify things certainly, but where's your pipe extending to? By default out of the box they go to center of structure. Okay, there's a rule set in here. If If I go into my rule set, that's forcing set pipe end location. I've set it to structure inner wall. That forces the pipe to be shorter. In my case, I want to snap right there as well as the center of structure invert. So it's a little tedious, but once you get this in there, it's not too bad to draw in a layout profile. So let me show this. Profile creation tools. We'll call it storm invert. No labels. We'll go to a left sample. I go to draw tangents, and I'm going to give just random PVI locations for where that structure invert will be. Okay, so picking up where I know the end of pipe inverts are, and then giving an extra PVI. So once I do this, if you guys have some suggestions, once I explain what I'm doing, definitely open to it. This is, right here is bottom of the structure floor. Invert is right there. There's no way to snap to that in an easy way. I can't turn that on. So what I find is the easiest for me to do, turn these structures on like this. Just grab this and do the magnetic snapping like this. Okay, a little tedious, but it's not too bad once we've created or turned on those pipe ends and everything like that. Okay. So what we can do is now stake anywhere along this. That gives us invert a pipe. And we can also stake center, invert a structure. Okay, so the surveyor would be able to toggle right through that stuff. It's pretty foolproof. It's alignment profile on the drawing. We don't have to think about invert between this structure and that structure. But it's a little tedious in here. The data isn't readily available. You have to generate that profile. I've got alignment and profile, so the same thing from there. It's just export alignment. How many of you guys are having to do this? Stake along pipe runs like this. Is that common? Yeah. You guys? Okay. And have you had points loaded in the collector and then saying run from this point to that point? Yeah. No, it works pretty well. I find things they can be real error prone in the field. The more of that stuff that's canned and ready to go in the collector, entire storm run, this can be pretty handy. So it's actually one of the tools I want to write that will automate the profile creation right along inverts of pipes and inverts of structures. Basically hit a button and boom, it'll do this along an entire storm line. So that's what I want to show you in here. We're going to turn it over to Jay now, and he's going to take that data that I just created. He's going to import it into Survey Access, Trimble Access 2.
Okay, so just to kind of recap what Brian did. First, we looked at exporting on a DXF file. Maybe on the office side of things, maybe some of the challenges or pros and cons to doing that. So what I want to do is first look at how the DXF files come across in the field software and some of the drawbacks to working with that. Maybe some pros and cons possibly there as well. And then we're going to look at some of these alignments that he sent out, particularly the back of curb alignment that he created, alignment profile, and then the storm pipe invert alignment profile, and the CSV file. So I just kind of want to demonstrate on how all that ties in. And I'm not going to try to tell you what to use one versus the other, but I'll kind of show you how it all works and let you guys kind of decide what works best for you. So the first thing I want to start with is the DXF file. So we're just assuming he's exported all these files. I have them all loaded now in my data collector. Just have to put it in the location on our Trimble data collector wherever our job file is stored. So I have a specific project folder for this job. These files need to be in that project folder. If they're somewhere else, it's not just as easy as loading it up. I got to go hunt and find it. So file management here for working with these external files is key. So the first thing we want to look at is the DXF file. So we have in terms of staking, we have two different parts of our field software that we use. We have General Survey, which kind of does all of our nuts and bolts, right? It's all our measurement tools and whatever. Then when we get into full-blown road staking and things like that, we have a roads module. However, when we export an alignment RXL, say that back of curb line, out of Civil 3D, we can stake it in either General Survey or roads. However, you're going to get different workflows with each, and you're going to get different information. So that's kind of one of the things I want to go over. But first, starting with the DXF, I just have a simple job created here, connected to GPS. And basically, when we want to stake anything on a DXF in our field software, we're just using it right through the map screen. So on the right-hand side of the screen, I'm just going to open up Map. And I just have my blank screen, and that little green plus symbol is my location, okay? To load my DXF file, I'm just going to choose my Layers button down here. This is where we load things in and out of the map screen. So you can see on the top there we have the ACAD site DXF file. So that's the file that Brian exported here. Now, when I select this file and turn it on, you notice a couple things. I have a plus symbol in front of it, and I have a check mark, okay? So the way this kind of throws people for a curveball once in a while is the way this works is if I just pick this one time and have the check mark in front of it, all that means is that turns on the DXF file on my map screen, and it's basically just like a background image or a map that I can use for a reference. If I want to actually pick objects in it and stake objects out, I need to select it one more time, and then you see I get that little dotted box around it. That means now that the objects in that DXF are things that I can select and I can work with and I can stake out. The plus symbol, if we open that up, you can see it also supports all the layers. Okay, so as Brian was saying earlier, trying to clean it up and try to get stuff out of it that you don't need. The smaller we can keep these files, the better. Especially on the tablets that we have now can handle it, but on the other controllers that aren't the tablets, they don't have the processing power that the tablets do. So you have the ability to come in here and turn layers on or off and just kind of work with what you need at that point. Now if I just hit accept here, notice it updates my map screen. So now I have my DXF file in the field and I can see my location. So as I move around down here, you can see my little guy kind of just walking around the site. Well, let's look at this backup curb line right up here that he exported earlier. And we'll look at, if we do this with the DXF file, kind of the difference here of what we're dealing with. I'm just going to zoom in here. All right, so here's my backup curb line. It might be kind of hard to see with the display here, but notice what happens. I think this is a layer I have to turn off. We'll see. Notice what happens though. What my point I'm trying to make is when we export a DXF and we have this line work, when I stake this backup curve in a DXF, the advantage is it's easy, right? It's an easy export. It's an easy thing to load. I don't have to stake it. I don't have to open roads. I can do it in general survey. But the disadvantage we get with DXF files is that I'm not getting a continuous alignment profile. Right? I'm basically just getting a line segment, a curve segment, a line segment, a curve segment. That may or may not be bad depending on what you're trying to do, but the more I was, I guess, working with Brian, kind of working through some of the staking stuff, the more I'm a believer kind of in using the alignment method where maybe the DXF is just more your reference. Now, that doesn't go to say that there isn't advantages to using this DXF route. So what I mean by that is, if I'm trying to stake curb, I'm getting each one of these curves and lines or individual segments. It's kind of tedious. However, I do have contours in here for this site, and these DXFs actually handle these contours very well. So let's say I'm staking this pond here, and I need to stake a specific contour, like the top of the pond or something like that. Notice when I grab that, let me not use that one. I want to use. Let's try this one here. Notice when I grab that contour, I've got the whole contour. So the contours it handles really well. I'm not getting these choppy segments. So the cool thing about that then with the contour is I can stake that out at every 20 feet or whatever I need, and I can apply an offset. So DXFs definitely have their place in the world. But I think when we're getting into site staking curves and alignments, maybe not as good as we would want it to. So let's maybe take the next step here and look at staking the curve with the alignment that he actually exported and see how that's different. The first way we can do that is right here in General Survey. So actually I'm going to go into my map screen and I'm just going to unload my DXF file. And right here I have my north backup curve RXL. That's that profile he made earlier. Again, I need to check it and get the box around it so I can work with it. And when I hit accept and load this up, notice I have my alignment. Let me zoom in here and see if you guys can notice though anything that doesn't quite look right. Can you see that line okay? Something look a little off there?
Curves.
It ignores the curves, right? So I have my alignment. I can stake the station and offset, but when I do it in general survey as an alignment or as an RXL, I lose all my curve information. So how do I stake along that curve radius in here? Any ideas? Probably can't, right? So this is where having the roads module is advantageous. So let me show you this exact same thing, just in a different part of the software where we're going to switch to roads, which is more or less designed to be doing this, okay? So if I switch over to roads, being that this is an RXL, the software recognizes it as a road. Even though it's just a centerline alignment profile, I can still stake it as a road. So if I go to survey and survey roads, so here I have my files here. Notice I have my north back of curve, my RXL, the same file I just loaded in the map screen. If I load it in here and let's say stake it every 15 feet, I don't know, whatever interval I want to specify, and go into my staking screen, now notice I have my curve information, okay? And the cool thing about this is if those of you haven't seen some of the improvements we've had with the roads staking, is now it's all visual. It's not just a pull down menus and typing in a station and offset. I can actually see and pick on the screen what I want to stake out. So let's say I want to stake this run right here. If I zoom in here, you can see all these little circles here. Those are all my 15-foot intervals that I specified. So if I want to start running this out, I can choose my first little circle. You see that's 4 plus 15.211, whatever it ends up being. And I just hit start. And now it just starts guiding me right to where I want to go. Get as close as I can here. Got my point. Measure. Store. There I've got my cutter fill, my station, my offset. I can apply an offset. I can stake, 15 feet off, whatever I want. Just like I'm staking a road, but the curb is my alignment. Now if I've got that done and I want to move down the line, all I'm doing, if you think of your tablet or your TSC2 or 3, maybe it's not easy to be picking on the screen. Once I'm in and I'm going, I just use my up or down arrow on my keypad to move to the next station, and I hit enter to initialize the stakeout. So it gets to be very, very easy doing it this way. Any questions on that so far? Yes.
Is there a way to display the cut and fill without taking a shot?
Let me check.
Don't you have to be in a different mode, Jay?
I think
that routine doesn't...
Yeah, let me get back into here. Now, there's two things I can do. One is trying to stake out to a location, right? Mm-hmm. And two would be more of a where am I on this alignment. So this would be more if I just choose a string. Notice I'm not choosing an actual circle or a station. This should tell me vertical distance to center line right here. But I also believe, let me go back, if I choose this guy here and I stake out to a specific station, as I go, it is giving me my updated cutter fill right here as I go. So what I'm getting is my string elevation and my current elevation, right? And my cutter fill and my direction. So that is updating in real time there. That's probably the only place you're going to see it other than measuring and storing. And then the other thing I should show you is if I hit this little arrow key here, then I'm getting my, I have it set up, I'm getting the same thing, but I can set it up to give me like my northing and easting if I want to see that in real time too.
Does it tell you when you get to a PC or a midpoint on that alignment?
It all depends on
Increasing the...
It all depends on how you set it up. And what I mean by that is you can see like right, if I can zoom in here, let me just try it this way. You can see these extra spots here. So it's automatically going to put in, PCs, PTs, VPIs, or PBS.
I don't see a midpoint on that.
I think I have to specify that
Okay.
in what I'm doing. So there are ways in here you can have it put in like a radius point and things like that. It's just we don't have it set up that way. But it should.
Low points, stuff like that too.
Yep, it should. Well, I don't know what high points and low points. We'd have to dig into that.
Like if you're going and you just skip past a high point, could be crucial.
That I would have to look into because I'm not sure, because their stationing might not pick that up unless it's in angle point or something like that. Then it would probably recognize it, but we might have to manually throw a station in there, which I can do on the fly. If I knew that. The thing about this is if it's not fully automated, and let's say I have a high point station that's not showing up on here, I can tap and hold on the screen. So I got to get out of here first. I think I have to pick this guy. I can tap and hold on the screen, and I can key in any station I want on the fly as well. That may not be, there might be an easier way to do it, but as of what I have here, that's probably how I would do it in this scenario. All right, so that would be the back of curb alignment. So we've got kind of pros and cons with DXF, which we've seen here. The difference between staking that back of curb RXL in general survey versus roads. The last thing that Brian looked at in there was the pipe runs, right, the structures. So two things he exported. We had the CSV file that had all the center of structure locations, okay? And then we had the actual pipe run alignment that had all the inverts defined as well. So we can basically combine both of those and work with them together if we want through either roads or general survey. So if I go back here to my map screen in general survey, and I go to my layers, you see I have my storm invert. That's that pipe run RXL he exported out. If I load that up, there's my alignment. I'm going to try to get closer over there so I can zoom in. The other thing I should mention that I didn't in the last one is when we're staking that alignment in general survey and we want to cut or fill to that, right? The only way we're going to get a cut or fill to the alignment in general survey is if we're staking the alignment out. The minute I put an offset in, my cut or fill is going to be a question mark. It's not going to give that to me. So if I want to stake an offset and get a cut or fill to center line, then I need to be in the roads module to do that as well. I just failed to mention that, but that's pretty key.
Could you stake that curb line out just as a road?
You can't stake a road in general survey, that's the thing. So
yeah.
General survey is an alignment only, so that's, I guess, where Trimble makes the cut, right? Is you have functionality to this point. If you want to add it, then you got to work in roads. All right, so here we have our storm, our pipe run. And notice here we have a few different things, right? We have the invert in, the center invert, right? And the invert out. Those are those 3 points you defined. But we don't have our center of structure on here. So I can stake this out easily, just station and offset like I'm used to. All those invert in, center invert, and invert out, those are all defined positions on my alignment that I can navigate to and stake. And if I want to add in my my manhole CSV of the centers of structures, the easiest way to do that is to back out, and in your job properties, just go ahead and link that file. So I have my storm manhole center structure CSV file that he created in there. If I link that file in here, didn't like that CSV. Let me do this. It didn't like my CSV. I think I have your original export. But Brian had said we had to do some formatting, right? We have to format it in a way that Access is going to want to import it.
Do you have the formatted one?
I think I do. Let me
Okay.
just see if I
Well,
can.
while he's
find
getting
it.
that, I just wanted to make one clarification. So those PVIs in there, the one that's an actual PI, that is structure. We can stake center structure right there. The point we're making here is that it can be a little tough to see them necessarily. So if you, sometimes just importing the structures, the CSVs, will just give you that nice label and it'll say manhole 1, manhole 2, manhole 3. The RXL that's loaded, while technically you have that geometry point of center of structure at structure invert, you don't necessarily see that in the map. Yeah, I mean, you'll see the bend like this, but what if it's a pipe run that's totally straight with 10 structures along it, right? You're not necessarily going to see those centers of structures that well. So in this case, if we're actually staking along an RXL representing the storm line, the CSVs are just loaded so that we just get manhole 1, manhole 2, and manhole 3, just little labels in there. That's kind of the point of it. Because it's a little confusing, like I said, if it's a straight line.
So whatever did it in like that CSV file, and it's not, yeah, it didn't import it. So it must be corrupted, but what we have here is you see what he exported out. We basically have just point, northing, easting elevation. It's just a standard CSV file. That's all I'm trying to get at. So, but what happens if I have that file and I can overlay that in here, then I have my alignment run with my specific, stationing for my invert, but I also will see my center of structure CSV, my point in there, so I can go between staking out this alignment, and if I want to stake center of structure, I just grab the point and say stake that out too. So I have basically 4 things at that manhole location I can stake out. So the point is just to show how that kind of can integrate back and forth. Now, the thing about doing these pipe runs is I can do this in general survey if I'm staking right on the run, right? Because I don't have curves. Everything is straight angle points, so I don't have to worry about that. However, like I said, is if I'm trying to stake some sort of offset, I'm not going to get any cut or fill information if I need that. So again, I could stake that out in roads. So just showing you what the different options are in terms of compatibility. These are all common issues that we run into with our users. It's kind of that, I got this from the office, what do I do with it? So that kind of wraps up my site. Oh, actually, no, it doesn't. I have one more thing. Never mind. Fake out, Brian. I'm sorry. I want to show you the TTM file. He had the surface, the TTM file for spot checks. I forgot to add that in here. So if we want to add that to the mix, I don't have it in here.
That's the one that he bombed out of.
Yeah, I should have a copy of it though. Just give me 1 second. I think I deleted it. The TTM file is basically, he's just exporting out his finished surface, and I can use that as a reference. I'll just put it in here real quick. Use it as a reference to spot check elevations throughout the site as I go. Also, what I can do with that TTM file, and maybe it would be more advantageous in the road side of this thing, is let's say let's say Brian exports out a corridor for me, and when he exports out a corridor, it's designed to finish surface, right? Well, let's say I need to stake subgrade or whatever. I can still stake this finished grade corridor, centerline, station, and offset, but I can load a TTM surface of subgrade, and I can have it give me my cuts or fill to subgrade, but reference my finished grade for my station and offset, so I have some flexibility there. So I'm going to get this in here. I tried to clean out all of my practice files and I deleted one too many. Alright, so now I should be able to load my TTM. Okay, that's the surface that he exported or attempted to. And when I load that in here, you can see I've got my surface now on the map screen. So anywhere I go, you see right here I've got a DTM elevation, I've got my elevation, and I've got my cut or fill in real time as I'm working on this surface. So you can see as I move this little guy around, that all magically updates as I go. Okay?
How would you go about offsetting that a foot down for your subgrade? Can you do that?
Well, you should be able to, I believe that's a good question, because you can do a stakeout DTM. And a stakeout DTM is just like a measurement tool, and there you could put your vertical offsets. You could put -2 feet or whatever, and it would calculate that for you.
You could of course be doing it in Civil 3D, paste FG into like a subgrade surface and then do a raise lower on that subgrade surface if you wanted multiple TTMs in your collector.
All right.
All set? Okay.
Yep.
So a little more to show you guys. and that's working with corridors. Let me jump into this drawing. We've got a fairly simple corridor, a couple baselines, a couple different regions. And I want to point out a few things. We have a few different options here. We can export the entire corridor, or we can start pulling alignments and profiles out of this. A lot of it comes down to what kind of stationing do you need. So for example, I can pull alignment and profile out along this back of curb line here. I can pull that out of that corridor. But what's the stationing unit on it? It's not going to be along center line. That's one of the disadvantages here. But it's simple. It gives me one single curb line, right? The tools we can use to do that, if I pick on my corridor, I have alignment from corridor. I run this, it's recognizing the point codes in my corridor. So that's right along the back of curb in my template or my subassembly here. I run that, and I get, yeah, that was fine, north edge. Let me put major and minor only on here. And it creates a profile as well. One of the nice things it does, so I'm going to say OK to the profile here, is the alignment it actually creates. If I pick on it, did I get it there? Yeah. So those of you familiar with corridors, how many people use corridors on a regular basis? Okay. We understand what feature lines are in corridors. There's no curves in a corridor, is there? It's all chords along curves. Civil 3D is actually smart enough in this way that it actually gives you a curve along curves. It's kind of a nice feature there. The feature line, if we extracted that, right, we'd get a whole bunch of little chords. Again, though, that's stationing, not based on center line. It's going to have its own random stationing, and it's only going to do it for a given region. The alignment doesn't go all the way around here. So if that's something that's going to work, that's a nice way to pull that stuff out of your corridor. Now, what about pushing the entire corridor out? How do you do that? This is one of the big improvements they made on the Trimble side of things. We still use Trimble Link over here, and we use this export road option. And what it's going to do, if I run this, it gives me a corridor option. I've got one corridor in here, and then down here it says corridor details alignment. So Trimble and Autodesk didn't match up their terminology exactly here. Alignment here, think of that as corridor baseline. Because when I click on this, I have loop drive, north curb return, south curb return. Let me cancel out of here. I can only export as a single road an entire baseline. Okay, so there's one baseline, there's one baseline, there's another baseline. Okay, each of those equal one road. I don't get to throw the entire corridor out. So what it means when it comes to staking, you're staking this back at curb line here. You have to pick one road to stake up to here, and then to grab this curb return, you'd have to grab another road module. It's just the way the tools work. So let me run that. So you'd be running export. I'll need to click on it. Export road. And I'm just going to do this for the first one here. Jay magically has all three of these exported. But we'll just grab this loop drive one here. There's one key point I want to make here. When you run an export road, when you run an export road, it gives you a couple options. These aren't them. These aren't the ones I care about. How many people use this export road option?
Yeah, you get that all the time.
Yeah, or it just freezes right there?
Well, not the freezing, but the warning window.
No, I know that, and that's about the collector. This isn't the warning I'm talking about. There's some settings that are to come in.
Your road's too complex.
Yeah.
Well, I've never seen that.
Okay, I'm going to restart this because I want to show this to you guys.
It says side slope.
The side slope settings, yeah, and those of you who are familiar with it you know the significance of it. So those of you who use corridors, we know what corridor targeting is, right? It's how we manage things like varying widths and varying slopes in our corridors. In my case, Need a new laptop. Need that one of those MSI ones. Let's try it again. Trimble link. Export road. Loop drive.
This is where I usually cross my fingers.
There it is. Road export options. Okay. Corridor targeting. What is corridor targeting for those of you who don't know? How do I manage the width of my road, a taper, a widening, anything like this? That's through corridor targeting. I'm overriding the default slopes and widths of my sub-assemblies or my templates, okay? There's a common thing in corridor modeling. You don't really do significant corridor modeling if you're not doing targeting. Right here, to check these on means convert outside points to side slopes. Pretty confusing from a Civil 3D corridor modeling point of view. It basically means remove my targets and follow the default parameters. That sounds like a terrible idea along here, and it is. So what would come through is he would totally miss that whole widening there. Where it can be advantageous is if you don't have any targets except for surface targets. Because what it'll do is it'll put you in like a slope staking routine, where it'll take the slopes as defined in here, 2-to-1s, 10%, whatever it might be, and it'll calculate the actual catch point in the field, not the grading limits as I've virtually designed in here. Okay? So you want to hang on to your targets, leave this checked off. Basically leave it checked off all the time. And what this puts out is an RXL, the same as alignment. They're both RXL files. There's RXLs with roads in them, a road definition, and there's an RXL with just a single 3D path, just a single alignment and profile. So that's what I'm exporting there. So we're going to jump back into Trimble here. Jay's going to show you how that comes in, some staking options with that.
All right. So back in the field software, now all of this that I'm about to show you, this has to be done in roads. That's what this module of Access is designed for. So we're staking anything that's more than a center line that has, you know, offsets and slopes and side slopes and all that. Then we need the roads package. So that's what we're going to look at here. I'm going to go back into roads. Now the first thing I want to show you, two things I guess. First thing I want to show you is how we can review this data and check it, and maybe extract some information off of it, make sure everything looks right. The second thing I want to show you is what it's going to look like actually in the field then when we're physically staking this and what we can do with it. So to review this data, we're going to do this all through the design feature, or not the design, the define feature in the software. So when I choose define, I have all of my my RXL files in here, and the main one that Brian was working with is the loop drive road. Okay. So if I choose my loop drive road, this is where I can go if for whatever reason I need to make any kind of adjustments to the corridor, I can do it in here, but I'm not interested in that right now. What I'm interested in doing is actually hitting the review button down here. So when I hit review, what this gives me is it basically brings me into a map screen that shows me my corridor. Okay. Now I can do a lot of cool things in here. So if I'm going to zoom in to my corridor, I'm just going to go down here to the beginning. Notice where you had those two curb returns, right? He said we have to export those separately. Well, maybe I want to check and see how all that kind of jives when I get it on my end. Notice I have a layers button down here. So I can actually go in and I can load both of those curb returns in here, and I can see how that ties into my design. Well, this looks all great in 2D, but what if the vertical is off? Well, if I have a tablet, hate to put a shameless plug for a tablet, but with the tablets we have the power of looking at our roads in 3D in the field. So this is emulators in tablet mode. So I have my 3D orbit button here, and now I can actually look at this guy. I bet it's my display setting for my monitor that's not liking this.
Yeah, it's hard to see.
Let me try something here, because I was messing with resolutions.
We got just a few minutes, Jay.
Let me just go back to what I usually have this at. We had to mess with our resolutions to make it work with here, so let's just see what we get. I'm just going to go out and go back in once and see what happens. There we go. Now it displays. So I'm going to go back in and just load these back up here. Now when I zoom in here, I can rotate this around and I can see how everything ties together, how the vertical looks down here, and I can basically kind of just do a quick QA QC kind of thing on my road out in the field. The other thing I can do is, you notice I've got all these different points along my corridor which are areas of interest. I can select those and it gives me all of my information up at the top, okay? And I can go left, right, across the alignment and up and down the corridor, and I can review all this information.
And that's just taking corridor insertion frequency. That's
Yep.
exactly what those points are.
The last kind of review tool I have before we get into the staking part of it is if I hit the little up arrow, I can, I don't know, if I want to get crazy, I guess I can do a 3D drive. And here you can see where my curb returns tie into my corridor. And if I had intersections, overpasses, things like that, this is just a way I can visually drive down this road and just see how everything works. I can check, you know, supers, everything like that. You can see the widening. Everything looks pretty good, and I can go kind of back and forth up and down this road and just kind of virtually see it. Now, that's the review part. Let's go to the staking part. So if I back out of here, I'm going to switch my resolution back just for purposes, specific purposes here. We're at 1440 by 9, right? Just to make things a little bit bigger and easier to see. Now if I want to stake this information out, I'm going to pick the survey function instead of the design or the define function and go survey roads, and I'm going to choose my north loop drive, and this is basically the interval. What interval do you want to stake this at? Well, I want to stake it every 50 feet. Enter, and then now I'm back here. So if I zoom in here, what the roading software is doing is it's taking all of these offsets defined in the corridor and basically making a string line out of them. So I have different options when I'm in this screen. I can basically choose center line, and what this is going to give me when I hit start is it's basically going to give me a real-time station offset cut or fill to center line. It's just basically like if you're used to what we call the old way of staking, it's your position on road command. Okay? If I choose a specific string and hit start, I'm going to get station offset cut or fill for that to that string. Okay? I think the stationing is still referencing center line, but my offset cut or fill is referencing whatever string I have selected. And then lastly, I can choose a specific station, those little circles on the center line, and I can hit start and stake those out. And then they're hard to see because they're small up there, but they're open circles, and then once I stake it and store it, it just fills it in, so I have a visual representation, I guess I would say, of what I've already done in the field. I have some other options in here to put a construction offset. Let's say I want to stake center line at a 25-foot offset. Then you can see me, it's gonna guide me to my construction offset for center line. Okay, so very kind of cool when you're working with that full-blown design and getting it into here. You have a lot of neat tools you can use in the field to really make this workflow very easy. The last thing I want to show you is just in the cross-section view here. Notice when I do my cross-section view, I can also choose any one of those little points on my cross-section to stake out. You can see my construction offset is defined, and I can simply move up and down my corridor, and I can do construction offset left or right just by hitting that left or right arrow. And then the last thing I want to just show, I gotta put a 0 in there. If I want to do anything with subgrade, I just tap the line here. I can modify the cross slope on the fly if I want, or I can put in a subgrade, I don't know, let's say 1.5, whatever. And then it's going to define that subgrade and give me this point here that I can stake out. So a lot more graphical and more interface kind of working with these two softwares together. It gives you a lot of whiz-bang cool stuff you can do.
How many people have guys in the field doing these routines, using this new roads routine? So you guys, yeah, you guys like it?
I'll
love it.
Yeah, cool, very cool. Any questions or comments from people who are doing some of this stuff? Any comments, different ways they might have been doing things? Yeah,
I haven't done it in a while, worked with survey guys, but I remember with previous times we've done this export of road with the frequency you're talking about, how it shows every station that we sample a corridor at. Is there a way, instead of making a copy of your corridor or something and changing that frequency, to get that as an output to something that they can back off of if they don't want all those?
so you want to be able to dial down the frequency of your corridor once it comes in here.
Yeah. Or
That's basically what he's defining in here.
Yeah. There's two things to look at in here. Okay, so I don't know what you sampled this at, whatever that frequency was.
I had like 5-foot intervals on those curves.
Okay, so notice when I'm in this screen, this interval is my stationing, my staking interval, right? But if I hit options right here, I can go to page 2, and then those are all available stations. So you see that template assignment, that's your interval in Civil 3D. So if I want all of that information, I would check that on, and I'll show you now the difference. You see how I've got a lot more dots here, so to speak.
So were you wanting more info or less
no,
info?
before they were telling me that it was giving them all of those frequency, I thought, and they said it was too much information.
Too much to...
Yeah, so then you would just do
Might
the
have just
opposite, right? You would just go in here under options and just make sure you uncheck this box.
Maybe that was.
And it's going to basically gray it out, and it's going to give you your horizontal and vertical curve stations, and then your regular, as they're defined as an XS in there, is just going to be whatever your staking interval is that you define.
Yeah, and a little nuance to know, we spent a few hours digging into this. If you have a corridor model that it's 10-foot frequency, say, and then you want to, and you go and try to stake in between that, in a corridor model, like you wouldn't necessarily want to cut a cross-section between two assembly insertions. So if you model that 10-foot intervals and then you stake that to plus 25, so you're going to land in between. And so what's calculated there, as best we could tell, the Trimble software is not taking the exact strings as I've defined or the feature lines as I've defined in the corridor in Civil 3D. It's recalculating that based, and it does it along target objects and everything. It's pretty intelligent as we found. So it's not just like a export of all those 3D lines and then you just stake along those lines. It's a little smarter than that. So
The best I can tell, it's ignoring that, and it's holding the geometry of the center line and what the specified offset is.
those
And
offsets, yeah.
actually doing the curve instead of the chord, from what we could tell.
Right. Any other questions? All right. Thanks for hanging out.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.